We generally assume governance works from the top down. A single sovereign authority issues a command, and everyone underneath is expected to follow it. If that command is ignored, the central system has a ready-made vocabulary to describe the failure. It calls it deviance, a breach of contract, a crime, or simply a violation. But this framework makes a severe analytical error. It assumes that every refusal is simply a failed performance of the dominant rule. To understand what is actually happening in a social field, we have to recognize legal pluralism. A single physical space can contain multiple operative normative orders at once. State law presses in, but so do neighborhood rules, kinship obligations, and community protocols. A community saying no performs a positive governance act. That refusal is an assertion of a distinct rule system with its own internal logic and standing. By categorizing every act of political refusal as a mere failure to obey, standard social theory erases the existence and the authority of these overlapping governance structures. We see these competing normative orders collide in highly contested physical spaces. Borders, disciplinary hearings, households, and strike lines are all sites where different rule systems attempt to produce social facts. The official dominant order asserts its authority through formalized architectures of judgment. It enforces its jurisdiction by organizing space to exact compliance and administer punishment. Meanwhile, refusing governance patterns generate their own physical boundaries and enforcement mechanisms in those exact same fields. A strike line or a sanctuary protocol operates on a strict internal logic. They evaluate behavior, validate authority, and protect their members. They answer to rules, they just answer to different rules. To map this clash objectively, without borrowing the vocabulary of the state, we can translate these overlapping jurisdictions into the mathematics of applied sheaf theory. Modeling physical and social clashes in topological space allows us to see political refusal as a definitive structural entity. We start with a foundation from predicated governance theory, the concept of a governance pattern. A governance pattern can be modeled with three formal variables. First, we have the closure rules. Closure rules act as the internal logic a system uses to define obligations, assign status, and produce recognized social facts. Next is the witness language, which dictates how the pattern observes and records those facts within its environment. Finally, the recognition discipline determines how the pattern validates authority and decides whether a claim has legitimate standing. Whether analyzing a colonial state, an indigenous governance structure, or a mutual aid network, each operates as a complete pattern with its own distinct closure rules and recognition disciplines. Because both the state and the refusing group are complete, mathematically definable governance patterns, neither is structurally subordinate to the other. Where two patterns overlap, pattern E asserts a binding claim. Simultaneously, pattern R evaluates this claim. It doesn't ask if its member failed to perform the rule. It asks if pattern E's rule has legitimate standing inside pattern R's recognition discipline. The external pattern says, "This rule binds you." The refusing pattern evaluates that claim and officially recognizes it as non-applicable. In topology, when local data is consistent across an overlap, the information glues together to form a shared global section. Here, the binding claim fails to transport across witness disciplines. The rule cannot glue. This failure transforms a political clash into a trackable topological obstruction. From a data perspective, how does a system process two totally contradictory facts occupying the exact same local cell without breaking down? We rely on Belnap-Dunn four-valued logic, designed for fields with conflicting information. The boundary clash maps perfectly to the both quadrant. Witnessed support for the binding rule and for the refusal of applicability exist at the exact same time. This suspended state of conflicting recognitions is formally defined as a non-applicability cocycle. We track this persistent obstruction by assigning it a specific mathematical signature, an H1 cohomology class. The defining trait of this H1 class is its persistence. It remains intact despite internal vetoes or administrative appeals or external pressures because the recognized local translations cannot remove it. The unresolved H1 class provides the precise algebraic record of structural refusal. With this mathematical model established, we can test it against traditional legal vocabulary. Let's start with non-compliance. Non-compliance accepts the applicability of a rule, but fails to execute it. A non-applicability cocycle records that the rule never had standing over the actor in the first place. What about a requested exemption? An exemption is a mechanism granted from inside the external pattern's jurisdiction. It fails to resolve the cocycle because the refusing pattern explicitly rejects that entire jurisdictional frame. When the H1 boundary blocks the premises of the external system entirely, standard legal descriptions lose their descriptive power. They are attempting to map a different topology. The formal mathematics give us precision, but the theory originates in historical practice, drawing heavily from Indigenous political theory and the Black radical tradition. Scholars like Cedric Robinson and Angela Davis outline a framework of constructive abolition. Abolitionist work insists that liberation requires the construction of alternative, life-sustaining institutions, not merely the negation of police and prisons. This refusal generates a constructive blocking cell, marking the active building of an alternative governance system. The refusing pattern does not exist as a defective copy of the state. It maintains its own structural integrity, equipped with its own witness language to define repair, kinship, and survival. For researchers, this model carries a strict ethical constraint. We track this cohomology class to study refusal objectively, not to build better instruments for a dominant power to force absorption. The non-applicability cocycle serves as a diagnostic record of a community successfully withholding consent, interrupting a binding claim, and structurally refusing the terms of a dominant power.